Riven's arm comes across my sternum before I hear her move. Not a grab, not a push, just a placement, absolute and immediate, the inside of her forearm against my chest at collarbone height and her body, solid, behind mine. And my first thought is threat. My second thought is nothing because I have stopped thinking. The wall is cold through the back of my dress. She is not cold. Her mouth is at the curve of my ear, not touching, not quite, but the warmth of her breath reaches the skin there and does not leave. And I am very still in the way that has nothing to do with training and everything to do with not disturbing whatever this is. 3 seconds. Her arm does not move. Neither do I. Then her voice, low and even, and just above a register I could hear from across a room. You were about to walk into that. I look. The security camera above the stairwell entry, black housing, angled down, the little red indicator light that I have walked past every evening for 3 weeks without registering it as aimed. At this wall. At precisely this wall. I know, she says, quieter. A half step down in volume that my body registers before I do, something tightening low in my sternum and spreading outward. That's why I moved first. Her arm is not a barrier. It is the opposite of a barrier. I do not have a professional word for what it is. If you want to hear uncensored too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe. 3 weeks earlier, on a Monday, I arrived at the gallery at 7:15, which was my standard arrival, 50 minutes before anyone else, because the first hour of morning in the main room before the lights came fully up was the only hour I could think in the particular way curating required, associatively, non-linearly, walking the sightlines between works and feeling, whether they were still speaking to each other the way I'd intended. I had my coffee. I had my keys. I did not have an explanation for the woman already standing in the center of the main room with a floor plan. She was not touching anything. That registered first. In my experience, people who are not supposed to be somewhere touch things. They lean, they pick up, they handle objects as a way of asserting informal ownership over space they have no formal claim to. She was standing with the floor plan open at her side, the pages held flat against her thigh with one hand, and she was looking at the north wall's current installation with the particular quality of attention I associated with people who were assessing load-bearing capacity rather than aesthetic intention. Her back was to me. Dark blazer, black turtleneck, dark trousers, nothing ornamental, everything fitted. Her hair was braided, black, tight against the skull, the tail of it sitting precisely between her shoulder blades like something that had been placed there and would not move without specific instruction. The posture was not military in the way that performance of military posture sometimes is. It was just organized. A body that had made a series of decisions about how to occupy space and had arrived at its conclusions some time ago and saw no reason to revisit them. I said, "This is a private gallery." She did not startle. She turned, which was different, a deliberate rotation, unhurried, completing it fully before she spoke. Her face was, I am a person who works with images for a living, who spends a significant portion of her professional life thinking about visual information and what it communicates. And I did not immediately have a vocabulary for her face, sharp in the architectural sense. Dark eyes that did not move when mine did. She looked at me, the way I imagined she looked at the floor plan, as a complete object worth understanding. Yes, she said. I have a copy of your security contract. I said, you don't have my authorization. The authorization was filed through your firm's liaison yesterday at 4:17. She looked at me. You were in a hang. Your assistant signed. My assistant. I understood, in the practiced way I had learned to understand my assistant's periodic enthusiasms and executive overreaches, that this had been handled by someone acting in good faith on my behalf without consulting me, which was something I had been meaning to address for approximately 8 months. I called the firm. The conversation lasted 4 minutes, which was 3 minutes and 45 seconds longer than I felt it needed to last, because by the time the name was said, the name attached to the threat classification, the specific phrase, 3 credible incidents over 18 months, I had already registered the number, and the number had stopped the conversation in a way I found profoundly annoying because it meant I had no counter-argument. I am not a person without self-preservation instincts. I simply prefer to manage them on my own schedule. Riven did not look at me during the call. She was looking at the installation. At the north wall's sequence of 6 large canvases, pigment and ground resin on linen, a series I had spent 7 months acquiring, and she was looking at them with the same quality of attention she had given the floor plan, which was not at all the quality of attention they deserved, but was at least consistent. I ended the call. She said, without turning, "The southeast entrance has a 3-second window before the camera cycle completes. You should fix it." I said, "This is my gallery." "Yes," she said. She turned. She put the floor plan under her arm. "I know." She went to stand at the door, which was where she would stand, in various configurations and with various degrees of proximity, for the next 3 weeks. The first thing I learned about Riven, in a professional context, was that she did not fill silence. Most people fill silence, with observation, with questions, with the low-grade social hum that keeps interpersonal spaces from becoming uncomfortable. Riven did not appear to find silence uncomfortable. She appeared to find it useful. She stood at the door, or at the perimeter, or at the particular position behind, and to my right that she established by the end of the first day, and which she maintained with a consistency I found, against my will, somewhat remarkable. 3 feet behind and to the right, close enough that any visitor's eye would track to her presence before completing its sweep of the room, close enough that I could hear, in the quiet intervals between visitors, the specific quality of her breathing. I was not listening for it. It was simply there. The 3-foot positioning was tactical, I understood. It created a perimeter around me, not a visible one, not a barrier, but a spatial claim. What it meant in practice was that I occupied the center of every room I entered, and Riven occupied its edge, and the effect was that people gave me more space than they usually did, not because I had become more formidable, but because there was something at my periphery that was. I had spent a decade learning to command gallery space. I had never had help doing it. I found the help irritating in the way that effective assistance is sometimes irritating. It worked, which meant I could not argue against it, which meant I had to absorb it. She was in every room I was in. She was in the stockroom when I was cataloging acquisitions. She was in the office when I was on calls. At the far end, not listening, or performing, not listening, with the quality of someone who could recall the conversation verbatim if asked. She was in the kitchen in the morning, which in the first 3 days I occupied between 7:15 and 8. And she was already there, and the coffee was already made, and there was a glass of water on my side of the counter, with no explanation and no offer and no particular suggestion that she had placed it there, which she had. I did not mention the water glass. This was a tactical decision. If I mentioned it, I was acknowledging a form of care I had not requested, and acknowledging it meant, I was not sure what it meant, which was itself informative. The gallery had 6,000 square feet on the ground floor and 3,000 on the upper level, which connected by a staircase and a service elevator, and which currently housed the apartment that was mine, had been mine without qualification or complication for 4 years. On the 4th day of the assignment, I arrived home at 10:45 to find Riven's case, dark, structured, functional, and in the hallway. I stood and looked at it for a moment. She came out of the second bedroom, the one I used as a study, which contained a daybed I had occasionally used during late installation weeks, and which now apparently contained Riven. And she was in the same dark clothes, but without the blazer, the black turtleneck close-fitted, the braids still precise, and she looked at me without particular apology. "Proximity protocol," she said. "My apartment," I said. "The threat assessment updated this morning. Remote monitoring at this distance is insufficient for the classification level." She said this the way she said most things, as information being provided, neither adversarial nor conciliatory, simply accurate. The firm agreed. Your assistant was CC said. I was going to have a significant conversation with my assistant. "My study," I said. "Yes." She went back in. I heard the soft displacement of someone sitting on the daybed, and then the quiet, and then, after a while, the specific sound of her breathing in a space that had not previously contained it, steady and unhurried, through the wall. I did not sleep well that first night. This was not, I told myself, relevant. The opening happened on Friday of the first week. The show was called Residue, a group exhibition of 7 artists working in material accumulation, pigment, ground organic matter, plaster compressed over chicken wire armatures, things that documented process by becoming process. And I had been building it for 11 months. I wore the deep wine-red dress, which was fitted and knee-length and correct for the register of the evening. And I had my hair up, and I was in the main room at 6 exactly to oversee the final placement adjustments before guests arrived at 7. Riven was already there. She was at the perimeter, the far wall to the right of the entrance, in the blazer again, immaculate, her back at the correct angle to see both the entrance and the center of the room without turning her head. The braid was tight. I had been aware of the braid since the first morning, in the way I was aware of the architecture of the space, not as an object of attention, but as a fact of the environment that I had registered and filed and moved on from. What I had not expected was the way it moved when she turned her head. Not loosened, she wore it too tightly for loosening, but the tail of it shifted across her shoulder blades with a precision that was almost mechanical, the black of it against the black of her blazer, a degree of controlled detail that I associated with people who knew exactly how much everything they did communicated. I told myself I was thinking about the braid because I was thinking about visual language as a professional habit. This was the kind of story I told myself in the first week, and I told it with reasonable conviction. Guests arrived. The opening moved the way good openings do, a steady accumulation of conversation and movement, the works holding their own against the social noise, which was not guaranteed, and which I took as evidence that the hanging was right. I circulated. I talked to the artists, to the collectors, to the critics who had come in the particular quality of non-commitment that meant they were genuinely engaged. I was in my room. I was doing what I had spent a decade learning to do. I became aware, around the 40-minute mark, that Riven was looking at me. Not in the operational sense. She was always looking, always surveying, the continuous environmental scan that was professional function. This was different. I registered it on the back of my neck first, a specific alertness at the base of the skull that I might have attributed to any number of things if I had not turned and found her at the far end of the room, 12 feet away, standing in the precise position she always occupied, looking at me with a stillness that was not a scan, a gaze that had stopped moving. I looked back. She did not look away. A visitor moved between us, a collector I had known for 3 years, who was gravitating toward the east wall with the particular lean that meant she was interested in something. And the sight line broke, and I turned back to my work. When I found her again a moment later, she was looking at me again, gaze back in position, steady and direct, and I had the specific experience of understanding that this had not stopped. It lasted until close. Until the last guests had filtered out and the assistant had begun the careful process of confirming the works were secured, and I was standing near the entrance doing the mental inventory I always did after an opening, checking the atmospheric residue of the evening, what had landed and what hadn't, whether the show had said what it meant to say. Riven came to the door, her standard end of evening movement, the final security check, the confirmation that the space was clear. "Good evening," she said, which was how she always ended the shift. Then, "That dress." She said it in the same register, informational, and then she did not finish the sentence, which meant she had said the complete thing she had to say, which was nothing, which was a sentence with no object and no predicate that was somehow the most complete sentence I had heard all evening. She went back into the gallery to finish the sweep. I stood at the door and did not immediately move. That dress. As if it were a full thought. As if the gap where the rest of the sentence should have been was not a gap, but a deliberate choice. The kind of deliberate silence that Riven deployed when she had said exactly what she meant and saw no reason to elaborate. I stood at the door for longer than was necessary and told myself I was reviewing the evening. I was not reviewing the evening. I was standing at the door because Riven had said 2 words and then walked away from them. And something in my chest was still attending to the space where the rest of the sentence was not. The opening had been on a Friday. The second week began on a Monday with rain, the particular quality of late autumn rain that makes gallery light go cellular and warm, the white walls picking up the gray from the skylights and doing something soft with it that was not in the design spec, but which I had come to accept as one of the building's seasonal personalities. I was on the floor all morning with the assistant, discussing the catalog for the incoming show, and Riven was at the perimeter, which was where she always was. And I was not thinking about 2 words said at a door. I was thinking about the braid. This is the honest version. I was thinking about the braid because I had watched it during the opening. Watched the way it sat against her shoulder blades, the flat control of it, the absolute precision, and I had filed it in the category of things I observed professionally and then found, over the course of the weekend, that it had not stayed filed. It had migrated into a different category. The category did not have a clean label. The category was the one where I kept things I had not decided what to do with yet. Things I had not decided whether they required a decision at all. She turned her head that morning, toward a noise from the east storeroom, quick and practiced, and the braid moved, the tail of it sweeping a clean arc across her shoulder blades, and something in the low center of my chest registered the movement before I had decided to register it. I returned to the catalog discussion. I was, at this point in my professional life, 30 years old and had spent roughly 2/3 of that life being competent. Not just functional, competent in the specific sense of knowing where things were and being able to tell you why. I had built the galleries program from a building that was technically habitable and financially thin, and a list of 12 artists whose work I believed in before the market had caught up to that belief. 3 of them were now in major institutional collections. The building had been renovated twice. I had done this by understanding what I was looking at before other people understood it, which was a skill that required a particular quality of attention, the ability to see through the surface presentation to the underlying structure, to identify what a thing was actually doing rather than what it appeared to be doing. I was applying this skill, without permission from myself, to Riven. What Riven was actually doing, as distinct from what the assignment said she was doing, was being in every room I was in and attending to my existence with a consistency and specificity that had no professional explanation beyond its professional explanation, which was itself insufficient because no threat protocol I was aware of required this particular quality of presence. The glass of water, the sentence she did not finish, the gaze at the opening that did not move. These were, individually, explainable. Together in the category with the braid, they were something I had not yet labeled and was, for reasons I was choosing not to examine, not rushing to label. This was how the second week began, with rain and a catalog proof and the braid. On the third night of the second week, the apartment produced the situation that had been structurally inevitable from the moment we established we were both using it. I came up at 11, later than usual, with a catalog proof I needed to review before morning. A 70-page document with color corrections on every spread, the kind of sustained visual work that required a flat surface and good light. The apartment's main room had a table and a lamp, which was a single warm-toned standing lamp in the northeast corner that threw a pool of yellow light over approximately 3 square feet of the table's surface. It was not ideal for close document work. It was the only option unless I went back down to the gallery office, which was cold and fluorescent and where I had already spent 12 hours. I came into the room and Riven was already at the table. She had a site assessment spread out, several pages. I could see the floor plan among them, notations in small, precise handwriting in the margins. And she was working with a pen, making notes in the particular steady way she did everything, unhurried, each stroke considered. She had the blazer off, the black turtleneck, close-fitted, the braid. The lamp threw light across the right side of her face and her right shoulder and left everything else in the gentle dark of the room. She did not look up when I came in. I stood in the doorway for a moment, long enough to register that there were other surfaces available, the kitchen counter, the secondary table by the window, the ottoman that functioned as additional seating. Long enough to register that I was not moving toward any of them. Long enough to register that I was moving toward the table with the lamp, which was where Riven was. I sat down across from her, which put the table between us. I opened the catalog proof and found the first spread requiring correction. I made the correction. I moved to the second spread. The rain had stopped and the building had gone to its particular night quiet. The HVAC on its reduced cycle, the occasional sound of traffic from the street below, the quality of after-midnight sound that is not silence but the absence of ambient human noise. In that quiet, the sound of Riven's pen was entirely audible. Scratch and pause, scratch and pause. Deliberate even, the cadence of someone who was doing something that required precision and was at no particular urgency about it. The lamp was warm on the right side of my face. I was close enough to the lamp that its warmth was present, not uncomfortable, just there. And I was aware, in the way I became aware of most things in Riven's proximity, that she was close enough to the same lamp that it was warm on her right side too. The same warmth, the same source. Something about this equivalence registered in a way I found it easier not to examine. The table was not quite wide enough. I realized this at approximately the fourth spread, or rather my body realized it, because I had moved slightly forward over the catalog proof to see a detail in the lower left corner of one image, and the shift in position meant my elbow was on the table, which put my arm at an angle, and the angle put my elbow near hers, and somewhere in the movement I had not quite noticed, the space between our arms had resolved to a point of contact. Her forearm, dark turtleneck sleeve. My forearm, the fabric of my cardigan. The contact was small, perhaps an inch of overlap, elbow territory. and had arrived so gradually that I could not identify a specific moment at which it had begun. I did not move my arm. She did not move hers. I kept working. The catalog proof was detailed and genuinely required my attention, and I gave it my attention. I was also aware, in the part of my brain that had apparently decided to run a parallel process without my consent, of the precise weight and warmth of that inch of contact, the fabric of her sleeve against mine, the specific temperature of her forearm registering through both our clothes, steady and present, and neither of us acknowledging it. Riven's pen stopped, not at a natural stopping point. The page I could see from my angle had half a column of notes on it, and the mid-column stop had the quality of an interruption rather than a completion. I did not look up. I kept my attention on the catalog spread in front of me. I was aware in my peripheral vision that she had set the pen down, carefully, parallel to the page, the way she set everything down with the particular consideration of someone who placed objects rather than dropped them. And she had turned her head, and she was looking at the line of my face. Not at my eyes, at my profile, at my temple and jaw and the fall of my hair over my shoulder, which I had not put up for the apartment, which was loose and somewhat disheveled by 11 at night and not the version I would have chosen if I had expected to be looked at. She looked for a measured interval, long enough that I registered it as looked rather than glanced, long enough that something in my chest went absolutely quiet in the way things go quiet under examination. Then she picked up the pen. She resumed the assessment. I did not turn my head. I had been about to, in the way that someone being watched turns toward the watch, and I had stopped myself, and the stopping had cost something, a specific expenditure of energy in the muscles of my neck. I kept my eyes on the catalog proof and listened to the pen resume and thought. She set it down and picked it up again. She stopped and started. The assessment had a natural rhythm and she broke it by looking at me, and she did not say anything about having looked, and neither did I. And the contact at our elbows continued for another 40 minutes before I finished the proof and said goodnight, which she returned in the same register she used for everything, even complete. I went to bed with the specific alertness of someone who has absorbed something they have not yet processed. The second week's gallery dinner was on a Thursday. It was a small one, 12 people, collector level, a seated meal in the gallery's back room with the evening's principal work lit on the far wall and the rest of the room in warm, dimmed track lighting, which was a different version of the space than the opening configuration, and which I found, privately, more inhabitable. Riven was in the room. She was always in the room. But the dinner configuration was different from the opening configuration. Closer quarters, a fixed table, everyone seated and positioned, which meant Riven's perimeter positioning put her behind and to my right at approximately the distance of the chair against the wall, and the chair against the wall was close enough to be felt. I was seated between a sculptor I had been trying to acquire for 2 years and a collector whose acquisitions had a specific institutional logic that I found genuinely interesting, and who had the habit of leaning forward when she talked, which compressed the space at my left and produced a corresponding attention to the space at my right, where Riven was, where the room opened up again into the wall. There was a man 3 seats down the table who had made a career in what I privately categorized as proximity. The specific professional type who uses physical closeness and conversational persistence to maintain a kind of low-grade social dominance in rooms like this one. He was, on this particular evening, directing a significant portion of that conversational persistence at me, across the distance of the table. Then, when the meal concluded and the room reorganized into standing conversation with decreasing distance between him and me, decreasing at a rate that I had registered and was in the process of deciding how to manage, he stepped too close. There is a moment in proximity, a threshold that is different from person to person, at which the register shifts from social to something else, and he had located mine with reasonable precision, and I had the particular experience of being aware of where my body was and where it was not, and of doing the calculation about what the social cost of stepping back would be against the social cost of not stepping back, which was the kind of calculation I had made many times in many rooms and which I was very tired of making. Riven materialized, there is no other word for it. She was at the wall. She was beside me. There was no perceptible transition between these states. 1 moment she was at the perimeter, 2 moments she was beside me, and the space on my right was suddenly occupied by her body. Not between me and him, not placed there as a barrier, but beside me, at my right. Her shoulder at my shoulder and her hand at the small of my back. Her hand was flat. 5 fingers, palm down, against the base of my spine through the fabric of the dress, and the warmth of it arrived immediately. the specific temperature of a palm that had been warm and was applying that warmth to the low center of my back with a steadiness that was not incidental. It was deliberate. It was the quality of deliberateness she applied to everything. The glass of water on the counter, the parallel pen, a placing rather than a touching. The conversation did not stop. The man maintained it, professional enough to adjust his proximity without acknowledging the adjustment, and I maintained my side of it, which required approximately 40% of my available cognitive function, because the remaining 60% was attending to the hand. The warmth, the flatness of it, 5 fingers, the slight pressure of each individual finger against the fabric of my dress, transferring heat through the wine-red wool to the silk of the slip underneath, to the skin at my lower back, which was very awake. Riven said nothing. She was at my shoulder, her body slightly angled toward the room. The operational angle, the protective position, and her hand was at my back, and neither of us referenced it. The conversation shifted. A new person joined. Riven's hand remained. This happened twice more. 2 subsequent conversations, different configurations, different guests. And Riven's hand was there through each of them, steady and warm and immovable, a constant in the changing social arithmetic of the room. By the second conversation, I was no longer registering it as an event. It had become a condition of the evening, the way temperature is a condition of a room. Present, structural, not a choice one makes, moment to moment, but a fact one exists within. The fabric of my dress had warmed through at that location. The silk slip underneath had warmed through. The skin at my lower back was at a temperature it would not have been at on its own. At the end of the dinner, when the last guests had gone, I was in the back corridor with Riven, and the evening was concluding itself in the way evenings concluded when she was managing them. A few specific exchanges with the catering staff, the quiet, systematic clearance of the room. I was standing against the corridor wall, not leaning, standing, my back to the plaster, dress smoothed, hair still up. Riven was between me and the sound of the room, not quite facing me, at the angle that put the room at her back and the corridor ahead of her and me in her peripheral, which was, I had come to understand, her preferred operational geometry. Her jacket was open. It had come open at some point in the evening, perhaps from the repeated movement, the materializations and repositionings, and the lapel had fallen to one side, and in the gap between the lapels and the dark turtleneck I could see, at the collar line where the turtleneck structure ended and the jacket began, the faint architectural ridge of the black underwire bra beneath, the structure of it, the precise engineering. I had been aware of this for approximately 40 minutes because I had been aware of most things about Riven for the past week and a half in the way I was aware of the gallery's sightlines, not as a subject of fascination, but as a fact of the space that required orientation. "Stop thanking him," she said, without looking at me. Her voice was low, corridor volume, not room volume, calibrated to the distance between us, which was small. "He heard you the first time. He's enjoying the second." I had been in the process of mentally composing a follow-up thank you to the sculptor for coming. I stopped composing it. "Don't move," she said. This was different. This was not operational suggestion. This was... I looked at her profile, the sharp line of jaw, the precise corner of her mouth. A statement with the quality of a decision in it. The kind of decision that had been made before it was spoken. I did not move. She turned her head, fractionally, just enough to confirm that I had not moved. And something in her face was very still. Not the operational stillness, the professional absence of reaction. A different stillness, the kind that required maintenance. The sound from the room was muffled behind her body. The party noise, conversation and glass and movement, was present but distant, dampened by the geometry of the corridor and by her physical occupancy of the space between the room and me. In the near silence that her presence created in that narrow corridor, I could hear my own heartbeat, which was doing something purposeful and unhurried, in the way that things do when they have come to a conclusion my mind had not quite reached. Her hand was still at my back. Through the dress, through the slip. The same flatness, the same warmth. The same 5 fingers that had been there through dinner, that had been there through 3 conversations and the geometry of the evening, that had accumulated their own history of contact over the course of several hours and were now simply present in the corridor with me, with the muffled sound of the room behind her and the cold plaster at my back and the narrow air between us that was warm from both directions. I thought, I have been thinking about the braid. Then I thought, that was not the right thought to be having in this corridor. Then I stopped thinking and stayed where I was, which was not moving. which was what she had asked, which was the first thing she had asked directly, and which my body had answered before the rest of me had processed the question. The third week had a different quality than the first two. The first week was professional adjustment, mine to her presence, hers to the gallery and its geography, both of us establishing the operational fact of the arrangement. The second week was something I would have described, if pressed, as settling. The routines becoming routines, the positioning establishing itself, the two of us developing the wordless logistics of shared space that takes shape in any living arrangement and has nothing specific about it, except when it does. The third week was different. The third week had the quality of something that has reached the end of its established vocabulary and is waiting, with the specific pressure of that waiting, for new language. She said fewer words. This was not reduction. The count had always been low, but a different economy, a sharper selection. The words she used were more specific. The looks lasted longer. Not in the operational sense, not the environmental scan, but the other kind. The kind I had first registered at the opening. The kind that had a location, that landed on a specific part of me and stayed there for a measurable interval that I was beginning, against my professional judgment, to measure. The water glass appeared every morning. I had stopped noticing when she placed it because the placement had become structural, part of the morning's architecture, along with the coffee and the quality of light coming through the kitchen window and the sound of Riven's boot step in the room above when she first moved in the morning. Steady, deliberate, a cadence I had memorized without registering the memorization. I thought about this on a Tuesday morning of the third week while standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, and I thought, I have memorized her footstep. This is what has happened. This is the category that the braid belongs in, and the pen on the table and the hand at my back and the sentence she did not finish. This is the category of things I have memorized without being asked to. There was an installation consultation that week, Tuesday afternoon, that required me to be on a scissor lift at 12 feet, while the lighting technician and I argued in the pleasant, expert way we had been arguing for 6 years about what the correct degree of spot separation was for works hung in sequence. Riven was on the floor below. I was aware of her, as I was aware of the technician's opposite argument, as a persistent and unresolving presence that I was in active relation with. At one point, I was reaching across to adjust a fixture angle, and I looked down, and Riven was looking up at me, and she was not doing the environmental scan. She was just looking. At me, 12 feet up on a lift, in a paint-stained work shirt and my hair clipped back and my arms upreaching. Not the opening version of me, not the dressed version, not the version that would have been concerned with being looked at. She looked at me in paint-stained work clothes the same way she had looked at me in the wine-red dress. Something about this equivalence undid something in my chest that had been maintaining a position. I came down from the lift. I said something professional to the technician about returning to the spot separation question in the morning. I walked past Riven on the way to the office. She said, "The angle you were reaching at, did you overstretch?" I said, "No." She said, "You're favoring your right shoulder." I was. I had not registered this. I said, "I'm fine." She said nothing. She did not follow me to the office. She returned to her position. But that evening in the apartment, when I came to the kitchen table with my laptop, there was an ice pack beside the water glass, unwrapped with a dish towel folded over it. I sat down and looked at the ice pack. Riven came into the kitchen, saw me looking at it, and said nothing. She poured a glass of water for herself, not the careful placement she gave mine, just a glass, and went back to the main room. I held the ice pack against my right shoulder for 20 minutes while reviewing exhibition loan documents and did not examine what this meant. I was running out of places to put things I was not examining. The threat materialized in the specific sense that all abstract threats materialize, on a Wednesday of the third week. Not the external threat, that remained abstract, a classification level and a name and a set of incidents that belonged to another story, one I was not the protagonist of, in which Riven was managing through channels I had no access to. The threat that materialized was the one I had been not naming since the opening, the one with the braid in it, the one with the water glass and the elbow at the kitchen table, and the hand at my back that had been warm and flat and absolutely steady through the whole of the gallery dinner. It materialized because of a photograph. The gallery had a social media presence managed by my assistant, who was competent at it in the way that competent assistants are competent at things they have not been explicitly instructed to do, proactively and with thoroughness. The assistant had photographed the dinner. Specifically, the assistant had photographed the end of the dinner, the standing conversation portion, and had caught, in one of the photographs, the moment when Riven materialized beside me with the man who stood too close. The photograph was candid. The assistant had a good eye, which I had encouraged, which in this context I was retrospectively less certain about, and it caught. Riven at my shoulder, her hand at my back, her body angled toward the room with the specific quality of attention that was her operational posture. And me, at the center of the frame, in the wine-red dress, my profile 3/4 turned, which caught the line of my jaw and the shape of my mouth and the specific quality of my expression, which was, I looked at the photograph for a long time. My assistant had sent it with the caption, "Love this one for the gallery archives," and a small smiling face, which was the kind of editorial commentary my assistant embedded in things when she thought she was being subtle, which she was not, and which I was going to address at some point in the near future. I closed the laptop. I sat with the closed laptop in the gallery office and had a conversation with myself of the kind I had been deferring for approximately 2 weeks, which was the conversation that begins with the acknowledgement that there is something to have a conversation about. The conversation went as follows. The body responds first. I know this. I work with art for a living, which means I work with the vocabulary of physical response. The way a particular image produces a particular sensation in a particular location, in the chest or the throat or the low center of the sternum. The way recognition arrives before interpretation, before conscious evaluation, before the mind has formulated its assessment. I know the body responds first. I have known this professionally for a decade and have applied it to my work with a high degree of rigor. I had been applying it to Riven, not as analysis, not as professional taxonomy. In the way the body actually does it, without asking, without consultation, without the courtesy of waiting for the mind to weigh in. My body had been responding to Riven since day one, since the Monday morning with the floor plan, since the moment she had turned and looked at me for the first time with that complete, unhurried attention. It had been responding to the braid and the pen and the hand and the footstep and the ice pack and every glass of water placed on every surface, and it had been doing this in the specific, anatomically precise way that the body has, which does not have much use for professional categorization or strategic deferral. I was 30 years old. I had built a gallery. I knew what I was looking at. I put the photograph in a folder on the desktop labeled Miscellaneous, which was the folder I used for things I had not yet decided whether they were important, and I went back out to the gallery floor, and I did not behave differently. I was not a person who behaved differently because of things I had admitted to myself. That was not the threshold. The threshold was something else, and it was coming. On Thursday of the third week, the gallery was quiet. It was a between-shows week. Residue had closed, the next exhibition was in build, the floor was cleared, and the lighting rigs were being repositioned by the technicians. And the main room had the particular quality of gallery space mid-configuration. The white walls completely bare, the ceiling track empty, the floor showing the small evidence of previous hanging. Tiny picture hook holes, a ghost of a pencil line, space between states. I found this version of the gallery useful for thinking. The emptiness was not a deficiency. It was a preparation. I was there alone, or in the Riven sense of alone, which was that the technicians were in the upper gallery and Riven was in the main room with me at the perimeter, which meant I was effectively alone in the operational sense while not being alone in the sensory sense, which was a condition I had become so accustomed to that I was no longer certain I would know what to do with its absence. I was standing in the center of the room. This was the position I occupied when I was doing the seeing the empty room thinking, standing at the center, turning slowly, feeling the space. I had done this in every configuration of this gallery for 4 years, before every installation, after every strike. The room spoke differently when empty. You could hear the architecture. I turned and Riven was watching me, not the scan, not the environmental assessment. She was at the far wall, 15 feet away, in her operational position, and she was watching me turn slowly in the empty white room, the way I sometimes found her watching things in the gallery, with the quality of attention she had given the installation on that first morning, the floor plan quality, the understanding what a thing is. Actually, doing attention. I stopped turning. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Watching you work." "I'm not working. I'm standing in an empty room." "I know," she said. She looked at me with the level directness she used for everything. "That's work." I was quiet for a moment. The room was very quiet. The technicians above us were between tasks, and the HVAC was in a low interval, and the city outside was doing the mid-morning thing where it recedes slightly from its own insistence. In that quiet, Riven's voice had the specific quality of having been placed there deliberately, as she placed everything. How long? I said, and then I stopped, because the end of that sentence was several different sentences, and I had not decided which one I was asking. She looked at me. The glass of water, I said. How long were you going to keep doing that? As long as it was useful, she said. And if I asked you to stop? She was quiet for a moment. The length of the pause was measurable. 3 seconds, perhaps 4. And in those seconds, the room was very still. The white walls, very white. The light, very even. Then she said, I'd stop. But you haven't asked, she said. It was not an invitation. It was an observation. An accurate one. I stood in the center of the room and did not ask her to stop. The evening of the same Thursday was when it happened, or continued to happen, or arrived at the thing it had always been arriving at. The gallery had closed, the technicians had gone, my assistant had gone, the building had settled into its after-hours sound profile, the HVAC in its reduced cycle, the city outside doing its late evening modulation toward night. I had stayed to review the new lighting spec for the incoming show, which required extended time in the upper gallery. And Riven had stayed because Riven was always where I was. I was in the upper gallery for 40 minutes. When I came down, Riven was in the main room. She had her back to me initially, at the windows, the ones that faced the street, looking out at the city. The main room's night configuration, the primary lighting off, only the security spots on their post-close interval, the warm, persistent glow of the streetlight coming through the glass. She was in half dark, the blazer off, the black turtleneck, the braid still precise in the specific way it always was, always exact. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her. She turned before I said anything. She always turned before I said anything, which was either tactical awareness or something else, and I had stopped categorizing it as one or the other. Done? She said. Almost, I said. I need to walk the south wall. The south wall was the longest wall in the main room, 30 feet of unbroken white plane, currently empty, and the new installation's keyworks were going along it, which meant the sight lines needed to be walked from several positions to confirm the spacing spec was right. I walked it. I walked the positions, center, left quarter, right quarter, entrance. And Riven was where she always was, to my right and behind, 3 feet. Her boot step on the concrete floor, a sound I had memorized. I was at the entrance position, the final position of the south wall walk, which put my back to the stairs and my face to the main room, the full 30 feet of south wall to my left. It was the position where I could see the whole relationship of the space at once, how the proportions held, whether the scale of the proposed installation was right for the volume of the room. I was standing there doing that seeing, and Riven was at my right, slightly behind the 3-foot perimeter, and I was aware of her the way I was always aware of her, with my body specifically in the lower sternum and the back of the neck and the inside of my left wrist, where the blood moves close to the surface. Then I took a step forward toward the south wall just to recalibrate the distance. And there was a sound, quick and specific, and Riven's arm came across my sternum. Not rough, not sudden in the alarming sense, absolute. The inside of her forearm at my chest, at the precise height of my collarbone, her body close behind mine, her mouth not touching, at the curve of my ear. I had been here before. I was back to the beginning. You were about to walk into that, she said. I looked. The security camera above the stairwell entry, the angle, the little red indicator light aimed precisely at this wall, at this position. Her arm was against my chest. She was very close. The scent of her was cedar and something cold, clean, a smell I had been cataloging for 3 weeks without acknowledging the cataloging. And at this distance, it was present in a way that was not background. Her body heat was against my back, not touching beyond the arm, but proximate enough that I could feel it through the fabric of my dress. The warmth of her breath at my ear was a specific anatomical fact. The back of my ear, the curve where the skull meets the jaw, the precise location where her breath reached my skin and did not leave. I know, she said. That's why I moved first. Her arm was not a barrier. I stood in the held moment and had the clear, unglamorous, entirely honest thought that I had been here for 3 weeks. That the water glass and the braid and the pen and the hand at my back and the footstep and the ice pack and every careful parallel placement had been here, in this moment, the whole time, not building toward it, not pointing at it, but being it in the accumulated way that things accumulate when neither person is pretending they are not. The arm at my sternum was the same pressure as the hand at my back at the dinner. The warmth at my ear was the same source as the warmth of the lamp at the kitchen table. I had memorized her footstep. I had memorized her scent. I had memorized the arc of the braid across her shoulder blades, which I could not see right now, but knew with the specific anatomical certainty of something I had looked at too many times to require looking again. I said, "Is the camera still recording?" A pause. 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, I was very aware of the arm at my chest, the quality of her breathing at my ear, even controlled, but with a quality of control that was different from the operational quality, a control that was applied rather than automatic, that had a cost. "Yes," she said. "Then we shouldn't stay here," I said. Neither of us moved. The city continued outside. The HVAC, the security spots in their interval, the small red light of the camera, steady, recording. Her arm shifted, not withdrawing, shifting, the inside of her forearm adjusting a fraction against my chest, the pressure changing from placement to something that had more to do with holding. The change was small. Its magnitude was not. "Riven," I said. "Yes, the camera. I know where it is," she said. Something in her voice had changed, had descended to a register I had not heard it in, a register that was below the informational, below the operational, a frequency that arrived not in my ears, but in the back of my throat. "I know exactly where it is." I understood. I understood that she had placed us here, not the camera, not the protocol, not the threat level that had never materialized. She had read the geometry of the room and the angle of the recording, and she had moved first, precisely, to this specific wall, which was the wall that the camera did not see. She had been doing this for 3 weeks, reading the geometry, placing things where they needed to be. I said, "You moved me here on purpose." "Yes," she said. No elaboration, no apology. The complete sentence. I turned my head. Not fully, just enough to expose the line of my jaw, the angle of my cheek, enough to change the geometry of the distance between us so that the warmth of her breath, which had been at my ear, was now at my cheek and the corner of my mouth, and the half-inch between us was charged with the specific pressure of its own maintenance. I could feel her go still behind me, not the operational still, the other kind. She said, "Say you want me to stop." Her voice was very low. The distance between her mouth and the side of my face was not measurable in any unit I had professional access to. The warmth of her breath was at the corner of my mouth, which was a location I had not previously catalogued as particularly alert, and which had now decided to be nothing but alert, the skin there noting the warmth with the precision of a thing that has been waiting without knowing it was waiting. "Say it," she said. I did not say it. The held moment extended. 1 second. 2. In the silence that was not silence, the HVAC, the city, the small red light, her arm at my chest was very present, and her breath at my face was very present, and the inch of air between her mouth and the side of mine was the most present inch of anything I had experienced in recent memory. Then something shifted. Not her composure, not a loss of composure. That was the wrong vocabulary, the wrong model for who she was. What shifted was a decision, and the decision was visible in the exact sequence of how it moved through her body. First, the quality of her breathing, which had been controlled and became something that was still controlled, but had abandoned the pretense of being effortless. Then her arm at my chest, which moved, slowly, with the deliberateness she applied to everything, a deliberateness that was itself a kind of declaration, from the forearm across my chest to a different geometry, her hand now at my side, at the waist, at the exact place where the fabric of my dress was warmest from her proximity. The braid came loose on one side. It happened because her head tilted, a small, involuntary angle, and the band at the base of the braid caught on the collar of the turtleneck, and one strand pulled free and the tension shifted, and the right side of the braid fell a half-inch from the skull, still braided, still controlled in the sense of braided rather than loose, but no longer tight, no longer flat. No longer the precise, controlled fact it had been every day for 3 weeks. The small physical evidence of something that had given way. Nothing dramatic. One strand, half an inch. I felt it fall from behind me. I felt the change in tension at the back of her head, the way you feel any adjacent change in precision, as a difference in the quality of stillness. Her mouth was at the junction of my neck and shoulder. Not quite a kiss. The pressure of held contact. Her lips and the warmth of her breath against the skin at the base of my neck, just above the collarbone, just where the neck curves into the shoulder, the warmth spreading outward along the collarbone in both directions, with the slow, even quality of heat applied with intention. Not rushed, not urgent in the consuming sense. Present in the way she was always present. With full attention, with the specific quality of someone who had decided to be where they were and had no intention of being somewhere else. I exhaled. The exhale was supposed to be composed. It had been a breath I had been holding for a measurable interval, and I released it, and the release was not composed, and I heard it arrive in the room as a sound that was entirely specific to the situation, and I did not try to take it back. Her hand at my waist applied a small, even pressure, drawing me backward, not pulling, not forcing, but offering a direction and leaving the decision to me. The distance between my back and her body resolved to contact, and the contact was warm and real and not ambiguous in any sense I had available. I leaned back, into her. Not away, not sideways, not in the direction of composition or professional management or the water glass left on the counter with no explanation. Into the warmth and the cedar scent and the held pressure at my neck and the arm that was no longer a barrier and had not been a barrier for longer than I had been willing to say. Her other arm came around me, not a sweep. An enclosure, measured, deliberate, with the specific care she applied to objects she intended not to break. Her forearm at my sternum from the opposite direction now, her hand at my far shoulder, and the whole of her body behind mine, solid and warm and absolutely present, and her mouth still at the junction of my neck and shoulder, with the held warmth that was not quite a kiss and was not less than a kiss, and had the quality of something that had been decided and was now being enacted with full intention. I thought, 3 weeks? I thought, the braid, one strand loose? I thought, she knows exactly where the camera is. Then I stopped thinking in that particular way and was in the room and the warmth and the cedar scent and the sound of my own heartbeat, which was purposeful and unhurried, and the sound of her breathing, which was no longer controlled in the effortless sense and was not trying to be. She said at my neck, Sonara, just my name. In the voice that had been below the informational and below the operational, in the register I had felt in my throat the first time and which I felt now in my chest, low and spreading. She said my name the way she placed things, with precision, with intention, with the knowledge of exactly where it would land. I turned, not halfway, all the way. Turning within the enclosure of her arms until we were facing, which changed the geometry completely. Her arms still around me but differently, my face at the level of hers, the inch between us now a different kind of inch. Horizontal, direct. I looked at her. Her face was different in this proximity than it was across a room. Still sharp, still angular, still the face that had looked at me on the first morning with the floor plan quality of attention. But close enough to see that the operational stillness had been replaced by something that required maintenance, that was being actively held in place by something I recognized because I had been holding the same thing on my own side for 3 weeks. Her dark eyes were very direct and very still, and the inch between us was a distance that neither of us was maintaining by accident. Her hands were at my waist. Both of them now, the warmth of her palms through the fabric of the dress, steady and present, and the pressure was even and deliberate in the way that told me this was chosen and not compulsive. That this was Riven making a decision the way she made all decisions, completely, with full awareness of its weight. The braid was still partly loose on the right side, the one strand, the only visible evidence. I reached up, not for the braid. For her jaw, my hand against the line of it, the heel of my palm at the angle where the jaw meets the neck, my fingers along the cheekbone, and her skin was warmer than expected, warm from proximity and something else, and she went still under the contact in the way that very controlled things go still when they are touched. Not a flinch, not a retreat, a reception, an absolute acceptance of being touched, of being the object of the same quality of attention she had been giving me for 3 weeks. She closed her eyes for 1 second. I felt it under my hand, the specific release of that 1 second, the quality of something that had been held, giving way by exactly 1 second's worth. Then she opened them again, and they were very close and very direct, and the inch between our faces was its own kind of statement. She said, "You should know." I said, "I know." She looked at me. I looked at her. The city moved outside the windows, the HVAC, the security spots. The small red light of the camera that pointed at the other wall, not this one, Not this particular configuration that she had arranged with full knowledge of the geometry weeks before she acted on it. Everything she had done had been arranged: the glass of water, the proximity protocol, the floor plan held flat against her thigh on the first morning while she looked at the installation that had nothing to do with any of it. Arranged and then inhabited. Inhabited with the full weight of everything that had been built in the living of it. I kissed her. My choice. Not received, not waited for. Chosen, moved toward. My hand at her jaw and my mouth finding hers in the narrow final inch that had been the most charged distance I had inhabited in recent memory. Her mouth was warm and specific, and she received the kiss with the quality she brought to everything. Absolutely present, no part of her absent, the whole of her attention here and applied. Then she kissed me back, and that was different. That was her choice, her decision, the controlled release that was not a loss of control and never had been. A choosing, deliberate and complete. Her hands at my waist, drawing me forward the fraction that closed the last of the space. The warmth of her body against the full length of mine through the wine-red dress and the ivory slip underneath. And her mouth against mine with the held warmth that was the same quality as the held pressure at my neck. Applied with intention, with knowledge of exactly what it was doing. We stayed there for a while. In the after-hours quiet and the city light and the cold white of the gallery walls and the warmth that neither of us had turned off on the same night, not once in 3 weeks. I do not know how long. Long enough. In the aftermath, Riven stood at the gallery window, her turtleneck back in place, the collar at the precise height it always occupied. The braid refastened. I had not watched her refasten it, but she had, with the same precision she applied to everything, the tail of it flat against her shoulder blades in its operational position, absolutely controlled. The only evidence of the last half hour, the slight warmth still visible at the curve of her neck where her mouth had been pressed against mine. I was at the table. My dress was smooth again, the ivory slip tucked correctly at the hem, the fall of it right. My hair was loose. I had stopped putting it up at the beginning of the 3rd week, and I had not fully registered this until now, and now I registered it and did not move to change it. The gallery was very quiet. The city outside had reached its genuine night register. Not late evening, not almost midnight, but the actual night. The hours when the city continues, but stops asserting itself. The security spots were in their standard interval. The camera above the stairwell entry was recording the door, the stairs, the precise angle of the south wall where nothing currently was. Riven moved from the window. She went to the counter, the kitchen counter, visible from the main room through the open service pass, and she picked up the key. Sonara's key. My key, the gallery key I had given her on day 4 of the assignment, which she had carried in her inside pocket for 3 weeks, with the quality of someone who carries something they have not been asked to return and have not considered returning. She held it for a moment, not examining it, not doing anything particular with it, just holding it in her palm with the weight of 3 weeks of it on her, and then she returned it to the inside pocket. The pocket closed. The action of returning was the same action it had always been: key to pocket, functional, storage, but it was not storage, and neither of us was pretending it was. She said, "I need to review the security log." I said, "All right." She said, "The camera above the stairwell." I said nothing. She looked at me with the direct, complete attention that was hers, whether she was examining a floor plan or an installation, or the line of my face 3/4, turned in a candid photograph I had not known she had seen. "I'll review it in the morning," she said, "before your assistant comes in." I understood what she was and was not saying. "The angle," I said. "Doesn't reach the south wall," she said. "I've known the angle since day 1. She went back to her position at the window. I sat with the closed laptop and the quiet and the particular sensation of being known, being understood with the specific, practiced attention of someone who has been learning the geometry of you since the first morning, who has made copies of keys and noted camera angles and placed glasses of water on the correct side of every surface, and who does all of this with 0 announcement and 0 request for acknowledgement because she is not doing it to be seen doing it. She is doing it because she has decided to. I thought about the braid, the 1 strand loose, the only visible evidence of the whole evening's accumulation, refastened now back in its operational precision, and I was the only person in the room who knew it had ever been otherwise. I slept well that night. The next morning I came to the kitchen at 7:15. Riven was not yet there, I heard her, above, the boot step in the room, the specific cadence, steady, the sound I had memorized on a schedule I had not kept. I stood at the kitchen window with the morning light coming through it and waited for the water glass, which appeared the way it always did, the way it had appeared every morning for 3 weeks. She came down the stairs, black turtleneck, tactical trousers, braid tight and flat, the blazer over her arm. She went to the counter without speaking, as she always did, and she poured 2 glasses. On her side of the table, her earpiece. Set down, not placed, simply there, on the surface, removed, not replaced. The first morning in 3 weeks it had not been in her ear. On my side, the water glass, condensation just beginning at the outside of it, the specific temperature of cold water in a warm kitchen. And beside it, the earpiece. I looked at it. I looked at her. She met my eyes across the table with the same quality of attention she had given everything. Complete, direct, unhurried. The operational distance had not reassembled itself overnight. The 3 feet was different now. Still present, still inhabited, but holding something different in it. The knowledge of what the distance contained, and the equal knowledge that neither of us had anywhere else to be. She picked up her coffee. She looked out the window. She did not explain the earpiece, which did not need explaining, which was the whole of the answer in the same way that the water glass had always been the whole of the answer, and the parallel pen, and the ice pack folded in a dish towel, and the key carried without asking in the pocket closest to the body. I drank my water. The gallery below was waiting to be hung.